Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Working with Local Media. I'm Darla Minnick with National Issues Forum Institute, and we are delighted that so many of you have joined us today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Since we have a large number of people on the call, we request that you remain muted throughout the session. If you've joined by video, just check the microphone icon on your screen, make sure there's a red line through it. If not, simply click on it and you should see the red line and you will be muted. If you've joined by phone, please make sure your phone is muted as well. We do want to hear from you throughout the session. If you have any questions or anything else that you would like to share with everyone, please send it through the chat box, which is the little talk bubble icon that you'll see on your screen. And we will spend the last half of the call interacting with you all. And this session will be recorded, and a recording will be available on the NIFI website in a day or so. We'll also follow on with you and send you a copy of the PowerPoint slides. So I'd like to turn the session over to my colleague, Betty Knighton. Betty is president of NIFI. Betty?
Thank you so much, Darla, and welcome everybody. We're so delighted that you are taking this time out to talk with us today. As Darla mentioned, the first half of the call will share some information with you, some insights that we've gleaned from the work of people around the country and research as well. And then the second half will be talking with one another. So I hope that you'll be willing to share some of your questions and some of your examples from your local work so that we can learn from each other. I am here today through my connection with National Issues Forums and also with my association with the Kettering Foundation, and then also because for many years I was working as the director of the West Virginia Center for Civic Life. So some of the examples that I'll share later in the call really come from community-based work here in West Virginia. We're going to talk about some of the big proper nouns of the conversation today, the National Issues Forums, the partners, this particular initiative, which is called Hidden Common Ground. But what we'd really like to do is think about the various ways that these insights can be applied to your work over time in communities as you try to develop relationships with local journalists and media organizations that shine a spotlight on the power and the potential of public deliberation in working on public issues around the country and around the world. So I'll start by just making sure that everybody on the call has a general idea of what I mean by National Issues Forums. The National Issues Forums themselves are deliberative discussions that take place all around the country where people have an opportunity to come together, look at different perspectives on how a public issue might be addressed, weigh the kind of pros and cons of moving in different directions, and develop a sense of where there might be some agreement or some potential for further discussion or public reaction to the issues themselves. We often talk about the National Issues Forums network, and that's really just this very broad and expanding network of organizations and individuals all around the country who are part of these discussions in their communities. They convene them, they moderate them, and when we're really fortunate, they stay connected with one another so that we can learn from each other's work. And then there's the National Issues Forum Institute, which is a very small nonprofit organization that tries to support this work through communications and the development of materials. Each of the people that you'll see listed on the screen will introduce themselves briefly whenever they speak, so you'll get to know a little bit about them as well. And now we'll focus on one initiative in particular that I think many of you are interested in, which is called Hidden Common Ground. And then we'll see what elements of this can be applied to your work in general. Hidden Common Ground is an initiative of the partners that you see listed there on your screen. National Issues Forums, the Kettering Foundation, which is a research foundation, Public Agenda, which also is involved in research on public issues, the USA Today Network, which is not just the national USA Today newspaper, but a few hundred local newspapers that are a part of that consortium of newspapers, and local conveners across the country. I would say that all of these partners are very important, but it is essential for its success that local conveners across the country be involved. There's one other partner that has just recently come into the fold that we don't have listed here yet, but there's a consortium of public radio stations that are very interested in connecting into this initiative, and they're known as America Amplified. What all these partners have in common is that they believe that 2020, as an election year, is an important opportunity to shine a spotlight on the public work that is being done across the country, in classrooms, on campuses, in communities, and online, as people come together and talk about these complex public issues and search to see if there is some hidden common ground on which to base future discussion and work. The most important element of this in 2020 is the people in local communities that are willing to do this work. So we hope that many of you are involved already or will be interested in becoming involved as we talk about this more. The key components are the Network of National Issues Forums, which I mentioned, the Kettering Foundation, which is undertaking the publication of 4 different discussion guides on issues that are considered to be among the most compelling in the 2020 election year, as well as other types of public reporting. Also, Public Agenda is providing a lot of their research on the issues that are being developed for discussion. And USA Today, as I mentioned, is not only supporting this through their own coverage in their national papers, editorial coverage of the issues and highlighting some of the ways that people are talking about the issues in communities, but also in spreading the word through that network of newspapers that are functioning around the community. Hopefully some of them will be in communities where you live and work. The general idea is that as divided and partisan as Americans are deemed to be at this time, that many really are able to think and talk together in productive ways if they have the opportunity, and that one of those opportunities is provided by these kinds of deliberative forums. I mentioned the 4 issues. Now, there are obviously many, many issues that are critical importance to people who are looking at not just the election, but the quality of their lives in their local communities. But these 4 are under development or have been developed for community, campus, and classroom forums because they are sort of at the top of the list of those issues that our Americans are talking about. A house divided, which has to do with the kind of political system that we want, and the healthcare, which has to do with bringing costs down, but still getting the kind of care we need, an issue guide on immigration, and an issue guide on the economy. As you can see, 2 of these issues are already available. So if you're interested in convening community discussions on either of the issues related to House Divided or healthcare, they're available now. All of the materials that are developed for Hidden Common Ground and through National Issues Forums are available at no cost to you. We can provide you sets of materials related to the discussion itself, as well as questionnaires and other kinds of support materials. The immigration and economic issues will be developed in the months you see there, May and September, and starter kits will be available on those as well. So what could you do if you want to become involved in this particular initiative? And actually, these options are available to you at all times in National Issues Forums, but particularly with these issues. If you are interested in in-person forums, we always suggest that you start with some kind of a planning coalition to bring together diverse partners that can reach out to involve people with different points of view in the discussion, to connect with local media sooner rather than later in your planning stages, and we'll say a lot more about that local media connection in a few minutes. You might be interested in helping to convene the forums. You might be interested in helping to moderate forums, or some version of all of the above. These in-person forums, as I mentioned, take place in communities. They also take place in campuses and in classrooms. Another option is to participate in online forums. The same structure and focus of the national printed material is replicated in an online platform known as Common Ground for Action, CGA. That's what that refers to. So if you'd like to participate in one of the online forums, you're most welcome to do that. If you'd like to help moderate one of those online forums, that would be wonderful. You can let us know, and a moderator training can be organized for you and others to get some practice in the online moderating strategies. And you can even host an online forum for a particular location or region. Most people sign up intermittently, and so they can be people from all over the country in the same forum at the same time, but we can also structure it so that a particular region or part of the country is invited to talk together. Regardless of what you do, we hope you'll share the information about the times of your forums, the questionnaires and the moderator reports. We hope you'll return those, mainly because we really want to shine a spotlight on the variety of work that's taking place all around the country. So knowing what you're doing and being able to share that with others is really helpful to building the public presence of this kind of deliberation in communities. Now, there are lots of resources. I've mentioned some of these before, and there's no need to write all these down. As Darla said, this will be posted online so that you can go back and see all these slides and get the web addresses. Mainly, if you go to the National Issues Forum website, you'll find the starter kits, you'll find resources and supplementary materials for moderators and conveners for face-to-face and online forums. This is a schedule that we've worked through with partners at Public Agenda, Kettering, and USA Today, and it's a suggested schedule, which means that there will be a particular focus on some of these national issues at particular times in the election year. Healthcare, as you can see, is going on right now, immigration coming up in May, and the economy in September. And so we hope there'll be a critical mass of forums during these times. However, please feel free to use any of these materials to convene forums at whatever time works for your own community. In addition to the ones I've listed here, these are ones for which there are full-length discussion guides, but there are also discussion materials on some other issues that will be a part of this issue, especially related to mass shootings or national security or privacy. So you can contact us for more information on that, and you can look at the NIFI site for those guides. Now, to get to the heart of what we want to talk about today, which is collaborating with local media as you go about this kind of work in your own communities. I said earlier, start sooner rather than later, because most of us have seen that connecting with local journalists and local media outlets ahead of time lets them be a part of the planning in some cases, or at least give them advance notice and awareness of what you're trying to do. So some of you already have contacts in local media. We'll talk about some ways to develop those a little bit later. USA Today has already had significant coverage of the Hidden Common Ground initiative. You can find that on their website and on the NIFI website. You might want to tap into that. There are 240 some, I believe, Gannett-owned newspapers around the country, and we'll show you how to get a list of those to see if there's one in your own community. But regardless of whether there's a particular Gannett paper in your community or not, we hope that while you can contact them and hopefully find an interested party there, we hope you'll find creative ways to reach out to other local papers, public or commercial television and radio stations. A few of the people we've heard about are working with their campus newspapers. So there's lots of different ways to envision what a connection with local media might be. We're really glad that we have Tony Wharton with us today, who will talk a bit more about some of his experience in working with local media and some of the strategies that might be useful to you.
Thank you, Betty. I'm Tony Wharton. I'm an issue guide writer for the Kettering Foundation and National Issues Forum, and I'm also one of the coordinators on the Hidden Common Ground project. Basically, we feel like because of Hidden Common Ground and this election year, this is an opportunity for the NIF network to build both short-term and long-term relationships with local media, with the emphasis being on long-term. Newspapers, public radio, even community blogs where that's possible. this is not only about hidden common ground. That just gives us the opportunity, because of all the attention that's being focused on the election year and on the issues by USA Today. One message we want to get across is that it's easy to feel in these situations as if you are asking for a favor when you go to local media. And we'd like to kind of put you in a little different frame of mind about that this is also in the self-interest of local media, of newspapers, radio stations, TV stations, that the point of this and the point of your working with them and engaging with them is that they can uncover stories about their community, about your community, that they didn't have before. And for journalists, that's an incredibly strong motivation. They want to find stories. They want to satisfy and fill that news hole. So part of the way we think of this is that you can say to them, hey, I'm getting citizens together, I'm getting people together in the community to talk about issues that matter to them, and they will be talking about it in ways that you may not have heard before. It's about kind of a different way of listening to people about these kinds of issues. It's very in-depth. It gets into the ways that people struggle with the issues, and that's a very important point, I think, for our journalists. If they want to do a story about a forum, that's great. That's fine. Even better is if they are willing to get into a relationship with you over the long term, where they're willing to keep the conversation going and to use the forums and the other materials as a way to inform their coverage and to deepen their engagement with the community. It gives them a way of understanding how people are struggling with trade-offs and working through their concerns. The other point is, as the initiative is named, it's hidden common ground. And part of the reason that the project was launched was to figure out where people not only disagree, but also agree. In this time of polarization and partisanship, what are the things that people can talk about that they actually find common ground on? And that's also a powerful part of your pitch to local journalists, that it's a feel-good story, but it's a genuine story. It's an authentic story. If they're going to do a story about a forum, one key thing to talk about is that forums are not polls. Journalists think very naturally in terms of polls, in terms of scientific polls, and it has to be made clear that this is a different way of gauging the public's concerns, that it can't be compared to a poll. Ideally, with large numbers of forums, with a large number of people involved, you may get a good, diverse cross-section of the community that gets you closer to a poll, but it's not the same. And we've never pretended, NIF does not pretend that it is. So it's important to make that point. Other than stories, there are a number of other opportunities for working with local media. One that we feel can work really well is op-eds. My colleague Mara Casey in a few minutes is going to talk a little bit more about that. But op-eds are an opportunity for you to land something in the newspaper on their op-ed page about forums or about the research behind these issues. And that's not necessarily a news story. Another is letters to the editor. That can also work for you. And then, of course, press releases. And we can help with that. We have templates for press releases, and we always have resources for that kind of material. One point through Hidden Common Ground, because National Issues Forum is working with USA Today and the Gannett organization, Gannett newspapers in each community have the right of first refusal. So we've agreed that when there are NIF conveners working in a community, that they will go, if possible, to a Gannett newspaper first. And if that newspaper isn't interested, then they are free to go to other media. A lot of times that's not going to be an issue because, unfortunately, there are many communities without more than one newspaper. But that at least is part of our agreement. But you can work, after that, you can work with any media organization you choose. And we will have a link to the list of Gannett papers available. So I think that's everything I have to say, and I'll hand it off to Mara Casey. Or I'm sorry, Paloma Dallas, forgive me.
Hi, I'm Paloma Dallas. I'm a program officer with the Kettering Foundation. And I think most of you know Kettering's a research organization, but we've also worked with journalists over time. And Kettering's research is based on the understanding that a healthy or a strong democracy requires people's ability to come together despite differences, to make sound decisions about their shared future and to act on those decisions. And our work with journalists is about what role journalists might play in encouraging that work. And over the years, we've worked with a lot of journalists who are experimenting with ways to encourage sound judgment and actions by citizens to address shared problems. And so I just wanted to underscore some of what Tony said and elaborated on it a little bit more. In Kettering's work, we've heard from a lot of journalists voice concerns that suggest opportunities in deliberative public forums. And I think sometimes when we think about the media, we have sort of a vague notion in mind. So I just wanted to share some of the concerns that we've heard from journalists that we've worked with at Kettering that I think offer openings for collaboration with deliberative forums and deliberation in general in communities. So the first thing is journalists are worried. Many are concerned about information bubbles. They're concerned about polarization, and they're looking for different opportunities to hear different perspectives without exacerbating or reinforcing polarization. And this is exactly the kind of conversation, these deliberations, that issue guides are designed to encourage. Journalists are also worried about a distrust of the media. And many see their strengthening of their relationship to the local community as key in stemming that distrust. One journalist said to me, if rebuilding the trust in journalism requires reinvention, and we believe it does, the revolution will be local and it will be driven by bottom-up solutions drafted with and alongside the public. Journalists also want to play, or many of the journalists we've spoken to want to play a more constructive role in our public discourse. They're thinking about the information that a community needs to address the challenges they face. Many have talked about people as active problem solvers and think about the role of journalism as helping to answer the questions that people need to do the work they have to do. And finally, Tony already mentioned this, but a lot of journalists are talking about the need to listen differently. And there's a real question about how. And this is where I see that you have the most to offer in thinking about listening differently. Again, Tony's pointed out some of these opportunities already, but there are opportunities to hear what people in your community care about. To draw attention to people grappling with trade-offs, not just saying what they'd like or getting into partisan debates, but to really grapple with the trade-offs that are inescapable in any decision. To hear the different ways that people are experiencing a problem, and to hear about local actions that might be taken. Some of the journalists that we've worked with have talked about connected journalism, dialogue journalism, and engaged journalism. And all of these seem to suggest real opportunities to collect with the deliberative work that you're doing in your communities. Betty, you had some specific examples you thought you would offer, right?
Yeah, actually, I have two examples that I've thought about recently that touch most of the elements that Paloma just mentioned. And I'll add another element of the relationship about trusting. The reason I said earlier that it's important to talk to local journalists sooner rather than later is because many local journalists are really interested in covering issues in a fair and broad way. And so they'll have to become aware of your work and convinced that that's what you're trying to do as well. And so letting them know that you're not advocating for a particular position on these issues, letting them know that what you're trying to do is to have broad public discussion about the issues and to give people an opportunity to do that together rather than get their attention on one particular aspect of the issue and a particular action to take. So that's one of the key things, I think. I know that in our work here in West Virginia with both West Virginia Public Broadcasting and with local newspapers, what the really appealing part of developing a relationship is that they have indicated this idea of playing a more constructive role in public discourse and thinking about how to do that. West Virginia Public Broadcasting has a tagline, telling West Virginia's story. And so I remember the journalist at West Virginia Public Broadcasting saying, this is a way to help us tell West Virginia's story. Because if we can be a part of listening differently in public forums in which people bring their own points of view, their own stories and experiences to bear on a public issue, that gives us so much more to base our storytelling on than more traditional means, such as what policymakers are saying or what advocacy organizations are saying, although that's important as well. So in one case, public broadcasting actually became a partner in planning an initiative where people came together to talk about the economic well-being, and they made sure that journalists were at various workshops that we had so that there could be not only so that on their website and in their communication with West Virginians, they included this as part of telling West Virginian story. And with the newspapers that we worked with, the Charleston newspapers of the Gazette and the Daily Mail, they were really interested in sharing outcomes of forums with the general public. And so after a number of forums had taken place around different parts of the area, we worked with them to capture and share key insights that people had in the forums, areas of the broadest agreement and disagreement, areas where there was actually some common ground and ideas for action that people had. And they donated quite a bit of their space in their newspapers to sharing those outcomes with people for further consideration and for further work. In both of those cases, they reported that it was an opportunity to listen differently to people here in West Virginia and to report differently on what had been said.
That's great. Thank you. So I think Maura Casey is up.
Hi, I'm so glad to be with all of you here today. I am in my adult life, all I've done is express opinions for money, which has been kind of fun. I've worked for 4 different newspapers for 35 years, always on the opinion page, always editing other people's opinions and encouraging citizens to write in. My last full-time gig was as an editorial writer for the New York Times. So my first message is to tell all of you that if you get anxious about writing, fear not. Nothing to be afraid of here. Some of us have math anxiety, some of us have writing anxiety, but your opinion matters, and newspapers and local media would love to hear from you. So there's some ways to go about this. One way is just to trust your own writing and to understand that the clearest and simplest writing is really the best writing. You do not have to melt the stars to get published. You don't have to be a great writer to be published. Lincoln's Gettysburg's Address was written in Sesame Street language. The man wrote in really small words. Fewer than 20 words had 3 syllables or more. It was no longer than a letter to the editor. I don't expect anyone on this call today to write the next Gettysburg Address, but my message is you can do this. One thing I encourage people to do in writing op-eds is to make the point that newspapers, which may be down but not out, are still out there as a major influence. There's 1,300 plus US dailies. There's huge circulation, especially on the web. USA Today has a larger circulation on the web, for example, than it does in the papers. By the way, op-eds are so called because the commentary was published opposite the editorial page. Op-ed page was begun by the New York Times in the 1970s, and that's kind of a little bit of a shorthand for writing your own commentary. Newspapers are pressed, their budgets are under stress, and they love local commentary because it drives up their readership and because they don't have to pay for it. They used to have to pay thousands of dollars for syndicated columns, and they've found out that people really prefer to listen in many ways and to read their neighbors' opinions. So you have an audience that's ready-made. Your voice matters. People trust opinions from ordinary readers and experts. But the other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that Congress people, senators and representatives always have people in their staff read all the papers from their districts or their states, and they really notice letters on issues of public concerns. At the same time, TV broadcasters and radio broadcasts will read newspapers and local commentaries to develop story ideas. So whatever you write in could have a larger impact than you realize. So to begin, I always tell people to think of 3 questions that all editors ask: why you, why now, and who cares? It's very rude. However, it's basic, and you should think about them as you start. One is I encourage everyone to own your own expertise. Just don't feel like you are not an expert in what you're about to write about. And I mean that sincerely. People really talk themselves out of their own authenticity and their natural understanding of issues, and your opinion matters. So why now? It's obvious. Any forum that's being held this year is going to cover a current issue. It's going to cover an issue that people are talking about and worried about. So it's a ready-made news peg to write about. And who cares? Well, journalists are very worried, and as are most people of the divisions in this country. And forums, because they enable people of all sorts of different experiences and opinions to speak together in a civilized way, is practically a news story in and of themselves. So the keys to effective opinion writing is this. You want to make a person think. You want to think about what's happening that's interesting. If you attend a forum and you want to write about it, kind of train yourself that if you hear something and you begin to think, well, that's really interesting, or I never thought of that before, just take note of it, because the chances are, if you think it's interesting, other people will too. Tell a story. For thousands of years, all we've really wanted to do is sit around a campfire and hear a story. We love stories. You can tell a story in 2 sentences. You can tell a story practically in a haiku, but people love stories. And if you include even a short story, just a couple of sentences in your op-ed or in your letter, it's going to be much more readable. And again, write simply. Length matters. Op-eds are usually 650 to 700 words. Some are a little shorter. Almost never are they longer. Letters are usually 200 words or less. They're hard. It's hard to write short. It's harder to write a short letter with a core message than it is to write long, but it can be done. Every publication will publish a little set of guidelines, and really pay attention to that. If you write more words than they want, chances are it won't be published. They might not have time to edit it, or when they do edit it, and they will always edit something, they'll cut out the stuff that you think is most important. You don't want to do that. So stick to their word guidelines. Keep in mind, you want to be interesting. Being boring is absolutely the kiss of death. So you have to avoid jargon. And what I mean is, within the NIF network, we have our own little set of words that we use. We talk about citizens, and what we mean is 2 people working on a shared public problem. But ordinary people don't think of citizens that way. They think either they were born here or they're getting their green card, okay? And so You want to avoid that unless you want to define it. If you use the word deliberation, no one's going to understand really the special significance that NIF or Kettering puts on that word. So you might want to define that. So just try and stick to simple language that anyone would be familiar with. Letters are great. Keep them short. Stick to your core message. It is so painful to write a letter to the editor because there's so much more than we all want to say. You can't say it. You're not going to have time. So just stick to the core message and pretend you're writing a bumper sticker. It doesn't matter. Some of the shortest letters are some of the best read, so go for it. The basic op-ed outline at the end, I'm going to have a website for you called the opedproject.org, and it's a one-stop shopping for helping you write your op-ed. And so this is partly taken from that. Your lead, which is spelled in a funny way there because journalists do that, it's a compelling first sentence or two to hook the reader with a story or something surprising in the forum. If somebody has a great quote in the forum, you're not going to quote the person by name, but it's okay to put quote marks around it and start with it. You can start with a story. That's always great. I was asked to help the Inspector General of Health and Human Services once wanted to write an op-ed on fraud and waste in healthcare. And I thought, oh my God, I can't think of anything more boring. So how do I make this compelling? It was going to be for AARP magazine, which was with an older population. And my forehead bled until I figured out my lead, which was fraud and waste in healthcare is the Bonnie and Clyde of our medical system. So that encompassed, I was able to find an interesting lead off of something boring, but if I didn't, I don't know what I would have done, because you've got to find a way to hook the reader. So after you write your lead, you're going to have a one paragraph explaining why you're there. Why are you writing this op-ed? And so you can, even one sentence, two sentences, that's going to be your thesis statement right after the lead, so the reader understands why he is reading this. Make 3 points. Don't make 4 points. Don't make 5 points. 3 works. 3 wishes. 3 little pigs. I mean, 3 is something we can all wrap our minds around. If you go on and on, readers are going to feel overwhelmed, and they are going to turn to the sports page, and you don't want them to turn to the sports page. So make 3 points. So towards the end, in a normal op-ed, and maybe not for a forum, but see what you think, there's usually a to be sure paragraph that introduces what the opponents are going to say. You might not need it, but you'd say, to be sure, my opponents will say blah, 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 and you say why they're completely wrong, and then a conclusion. And all this is on the oped.org website, which I'll introduce at the end. So when you send in your piece, you're going to follow the guidelines of sending in your piece, but one important point is to copy and paste your op-ed or your letter in the body of an email. Don't send an attachment, because they're terrified of viruses and they're not going to open it. So send it within the body of the email. And when you do, and if it's published, you got to share widely. Tell us, tell the Kettering Foundation, tell the National Issues Forum, let us know, and put it on your Facebook page, put it on Twitter, and tag people that you want to see it. Tag your congressman, tag your senators, because they will notice, and then they might share it too. And have a pointed, compelling tweet or a post headline, okay, with this, so people will be more likely to notice it. Social media will amplify your message. So here are the websites that I mentioned, and these slides will be available. The opedproject.org is fantastic. It will have lots of tools. It'll help walk you through pitching. Email me if you have a problem or if you're really trying to write something. You know, I'm really a fast editor. I tend to be a little blunt, so forgive me ahead of time for that, but I'll help you with it if you need it. And at the end, this tool will help tell you where the media is in your area and how to get in touch with them.
Thank you so much for that information, Mara, which is not only useful in the moment, but I know is going to be useful to you long-term as you think through how to do this. This is just another slide similar to the last one Mara just showed you for more information so that you can stay connected. We hope that you can visit the Hidden Common Ground section of the site, sign up for newsletters and updates. I want to reiterate what Mara said about staying connected. If you do end up working with local journalists, please let us know if there's stories that are printed. Again, we want to share that critical mass throughout the country with others that are doing similar work. Social media hashtags. I have found in life that if I have a question, I always start with Darla because she is very likely to know the answer or know who does. And so you can email Darla directly. And now I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Patty Deneen. She can introduce herself and she's going to lead us through a discussion period.
Thanks, Betty. Hi, everybody. I'm Patty Deneen. I'm based in Gibsonia, which is just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. Thanks for joining us. I think it's just been really fascinating information. With the time that we have remaining, and we're ending at 3 o'clock Eastern time here, if you have questions about what you've heard or comments, if you'd like to type them into the chat box, which you can find if you put your cursor all the way at the bottom of your screen, at least this is the way mine's working, you'll see word chat with a little sort of thought bubble above it. And if you click on that, that should bring up a box, which is a group chat. And at the very bottom of this, where it says type message here, you can type in your question and I'll watch for that. In the meantime, I do have some questions to get started with. So to go back to some of the things that Betty said at the beginning of the presentation. So Betty, you mentioned online forums.
Mm-hmm.
If our community wants to hold an online forum, how much time in advance do you need to set one up?
Actually, the time in advance of setting it up would not be that much time because the platform already exists and the materials are loaded. The advanced time would be for you getting that information out to other people. So whatever you think you need in terms of sharing the information to others so that they can sign up and participate, just factor that in. Also, Kara Dillard will be the one working with you to set up that experience. And so she needs some time to find an online moderator as well. So I would say at least a few weeks would be really useful, a couple weeks at the minimum. But I think that, you know, the more time, the better just in terms of outreach.
Oh.
Okay,
Had to
thank
hang
you.
up the receiver.
So here's a question for, this is
I
Tony
think,
and or Paloma.
I think.
You mentioned the kinds of things that are of interest to journalists as far as if I want to interest them in my forum. So the question is, if I have just a minute or less to interest a member of my local media, can you suggest just like a couple of quick sentences, you know, before the elevator door closes or the phone rings or something like that? What's my top priority kind of to get to pique their interest so that maybe we can have a longer conversation?
I would say, thank you, Patty. I would say mention that there is the possibility of the likelihood of them finding stories that they don't already have, of learning about stories in their community they don't already know about, that this is citizens getting together to talk about issues in a different way, a civil way, but in a way where they really are, they're not avoiding the issue, they really are struggling with it and working through their concerns. And that this is just one local example. This goes on all over the nation.
Yeah, I think
Hey,
you
Mara, here's a quick question. I'm sorry, Paloma, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think Tony covered it. I would just explain that this is what you're doing. And if you're somebody who's been leading deliberations in the community for some time, explain that. I mean, you are a resource that I think your journalists, local journalists may want to know about.
Okay. Thank you. Mara, quick question for you. I actually have a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned following the publication guidelines for whatever media it is that you're interested in getting an op-ed or piece in. How can I find the publication guidelines from my local media?
It should be right online. It should be under the editorial page. They almost always have that. In the print editions, they usually have, they would publish a couple of times a week. They've got a little box, but somewhere on the website, they should have, guidelines for letters to the editor or op-eds.
Okay, thanks. Sherry typed in the question, where can I get an NIF poster? I want one for my on-campus forums. And Darla replied to Sherry, if you'd like an NIF poster, please email me at dminich@nifi.org. So anybody who wants a poster, you can email Darla and she'll send you one. So thanks, Darla. For Tony Wharton again, if I interest media, my local media, and they want to attend the forum that I'm planning, am I under any kind of obligation to let the forum participants know ahead of time, or do I make some kind of announcement at the forum? How do I handle that?
Depending on how you're convening people, yes. I mean, I would certainly do them the courtesy of saying that there might be local media present, and then you would say so again at the forum. I think this raises a good point, one that has to be dealt with in each individual circumstance. Typically, people who come to forums aren't really expecting to be quoted or put in a newspaper or other media. And I think that in these situations, it needs to be worked out with the journalist. Journalists are always going to ask people first before they put them in the paper because they need their name, and generally they need their permission. They're generally not going to quote them without them knowing it. But it's good to have that conversation with the journalist in advance, and also if they raise that, to also briefly have that conversation at the forum.
Okay, thank you. This is kind of related. So Tony and maybe Mara would like to contribute to this also. If my local media writes a piece about our forum, will we get to see it before it's published?
No.
No.
No, I mean, in cases where it's perhaps a radio station or a blog or something like that, you might get, some back and forth on what they're going to do. But generally with newspapers, it's absolutely not. That at most, they might, call you and let you know when it's going to run or how, et cetera, but, generally not.
Right. Looks like Mara concurs with that.
Yes, correct.
And Mara, if I'm going to write an op-ed and submit it, is it best, is that something I might want to do before we hold our forum and it would partly help promote our forum, or would it be best to write, like you said, stories about what happened at the forum, or do I want to try to do both?
Well, you might grab some great quotes from the forum that would make a good op-ed or a good op-ed hook. I think in terms of promoting the forum, that's where developing a relationship with the local journalists come in. And it's, it's as simple as calling up the local person and saying, hey, are you on deadline? Which is always a good thing to do if you call a journalist, because they'll think you're very sophisticated and that they're on deadline sometimes, and they'll say, oh, this person understands me, which already opens the door to them liking you. And what I would do before a forum, just say, can I come in for 20 minutes? Can I buy a cup of coffee? Can I just sit for a minute and tell you what we're doing? And almost any journalist would love to have contact with a source of local stories. So in the best of all possible worlds, I would try and develop a relationship with journalists first, do the forum, and then write the op-ed afterwards.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is back to Betty Knighton. So from the perspective of NIF and the Kettering Foundation and the Hidden Common Ground Project, connecting with our local media, or this is anybody else who'd like to jump in here too, are we mainly interested in promoting the forums and getting the word out about what NIF is and what deliberation is? Or are we mostly interested in reporting about what happens and how it works? Or are we trying to do both?
Well, I'm glad you gave me the both option because I'll start there. I know that people who read the stories are going to be interested in what people have to say about the issue at hand. Of course they are. A lot of people show up at the forum because they're interested in talking with other people about the issue at hand. But I think that in our communications with journalists who ultimately communicate with the broader community, it is really important to communicate what is it that makes this distinctive? What is it that makes it, what is the nature of this conversation that makes it worth looking at, not only about the issue at hand, but about the capacity of members of a community who have different points of view to talk together respectfully, productively, and deliberatively. And so I think some combination of people were talking about this issue, but this is the way in which they spoke about the issue. And that goes beyond just their own ideas about what might be done, but the way in which they were able to internalize and deal with these differing perspectives. I think that is, I think for most of us who do this work on a variety of issues, the core is communicating about the deliberative aspects, but doing that in the context of an issue that's very real and very authentic to the people who are talking about it.
Okay, thanks. Paloma, from your work with journalists, this question, what are you hearing from journalists about how they view the value of what we ordinary citizens have to say, assuming we're not experts on these issues, but we have strong opinions or concern about them? Do journalists value the expert opinion more, or is there a change to really wanting to hear what we have to say?
So I can't promise what all journalists will say, but the journalists that we've been talking to have really wanted to hear from regular citizens, regular folks. I mean, we are hearing from a lot of journalists who are concerned that there's too much focus on expert opinion, that they're not understanding the issues in the way that they're affecting people, and they really want to hear how people feel affected, how people are talking to one another. So I guess the answer is yes. I'm hearing from a lot of journalists who really want to talk to just folks who aren't just interested in talking to experts. Tony, Maura, others?
Well, I would love to say that they would leap at the opportunity to work with citizens. I think too many just rely on experts. But I think that in your conversations, and your let's get to know each other conversations with a local journalist, if you can emphasize that your forums might be a source of interesting local stories, especially given the polarization that we're experiencing, given what may be a contentious local election, that they will be intrigued. What I would also emphasize with them in talking about the forums is that they are a little different, and the tensions that people wrestle with are the story. They are the story, and it's not as clear cut as some of the things I've written about, but nonetheless, it would be compelling and speak to their readership or listenership.
Let me just add on to that more, because I think what is really appealing is to hear how issues like immigration affect people in a particular community, healthcare in a particular community. So there's a local angle that I think is really a rich opportunity for journalists. So it's not just hearing from regular folks, but it is locally, what is the impact here? I mean, these are issues we've been at in our country for decades. They're not new.
Right.
But there are new angles that can come out of these deliberations. And I think that's where you have an opportunity with
Okay, thank you. Mara, just one sort of specific question. If I'm having a forum with a group of high school students or college students, in other words, young people who might be interested in writing an op-ed and submitting it, are there any concerns about having a person of a minor submit an op-ed?
Well, I think their parents would always appreciate the opportunity not to be surprised. They have access to the First Amendment like anybody else, and it's their privilege. But also, I would mention that editors are desperate to get more stuff in their paper from young people. It's a demographic that they don't always have access to. The people who read newspapers particularly are older and older. So it's a great opportunity, and one that most editors would love for them to take advantage of.
Okay, thank you. Well, we just have just a couple of minutes by my clock. There's a couple of comments in the chat if anybody wanted to look at that, from Robert to everyone. He's talked about searching a topic in his local paper, discovering what journals have written stories in the genre that he's interested in. For example, crime reporter may not be interested in a story about healthcare. Talked about an immigration forum, found a reporter who covered those types of stories locally and wrote in an advance article based on interviewing this person, Robert, and then subsequently attended the forum themselves. Sherry said, in El Paso, we get 3 forums televised every spring. Our panel consists of regular citizens, some experts who can lend to the conversation, and some students who are invited from the on-campus forums. So interesting idea is you can save the whole chat if you click on the dots to the right of the file at the bottom of the chat screen, and it gives you a chance to save the chat. Well, I wanted to again thank everybody very much for joining the webinar today, and want to thank Darla Minnick for getting all this put together so that we could actually have it happen. And I want to thank our presenters, Mara Casey, Paloma Dallas, Betty Knighton, and Tony Wharton. And again, thank you all for joining us. We'll really look forward to hearing from you, to find out what you're doing, to find out what kind of success and interest you've had from local media and how you did it, so we can share it with everybody else who'd like to follow along also. So thank you so much. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.